In our modern world and throughout most of civilized history, there have been many, many threats to uncontacted tribes, wild peoples, and indigenous peoples. For example, there's cattle ranching. Brazil's Indian Affairs Department found that cattle ranchers who had taken over the land of the Akuntsu had massacred almost all of the tribe and bulldozed their houses to try to cover up the massacre. These cattle ranchers also came in and burned down these forests to create grazing land for their cattle, and this really, really made it much more difficult for the Akuntsu to get food. Another problem is the disease. This is a huge, huge dilemma for uncontacted tribes. Introduced diseases are the biggest killer of isolated tribal peoples. In Peru, half of the Nahua tribe was killed by introduced diseases such as chickenpox and influenza after oil exploration was performed on their land. Another example of this is, of course, when the Native Americans were almost completely wiped out by early settlers who came to North America. Another threat to uncontacted tribes is missionaries, who tend to believe that tribes are primitive and are living their lives, quote unquote, in the dark. They tend to civilize the people. They build certain buildings and things in the wild forest and destroy the ecosystem, destroy the food source for these indigenous peoples. And they completely change their culture and their way of life. Tribes begin to lose their self-sufficiency as their health suffers because of becoming civilized and contacted. Another dilemma going on with indigenous peoples is colonists, and this has been prevalent throughout all of civilized history. The Awa are one of the few remaining nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes in Brazil. Their home is in the devastated forest of the eastern Amazon. Today, they're being closed in by massive agro-industrial projects, cattle ranches, and colonist settlements. Their forest that they live in, that they have their food and water in, is being slowly just taken away from them, and they have to keep retreating to small pieces of forest as it's being completely destroyed and deforested. An Awa man describes how colonization is destroying the land and the way of life of the Awa. He said, "If the Awa Indians have to leave their land, it will be very difficult. We can't live anywhere else because here there are forest fruits and wild animals. We couldn't survive without forests because we don't know how to live like white people who can survive in deforested areas. For years, we have been fleeing up these rivers with the whites chasing us, cutting down all of our forest." One other prevalent problem is loggers. There are many areas where modern hunter-gatherer tribes live in, and they are being invaded and decimated by loggers. The presence of the loggers often brings them into contact with tribal peoples, and it causes these indigenous people to die from disease introduced by loggers, or even become killed by the loggers. And it, of course, causes problems with the destruction of certain species of trees that indigenous peoples rely on for their own food for certain resources. And the last problem that I'm going to talk about today are roads. They are built through tribal land. They split the land in two, and they cause many, many problems. 80% of the Panera people in Brazil died in 8 years because of a major highway that was created in the 1970s. These roads just decimate the environment, and they cause these indigenous peoples to become more contacted, and it can cause a plethora of problems for them. If we can just learn how to begin to understand the humanity of these people and learn and figure out that we can learn a lot from them, I think it would be very beneficial to us as civilized people, and also just morally to help preserve the land of these indigenous peoples and try to make sure that we learn from them and that we listen to them.